Warsaw, German-occupied Poland. October 1943. By the autumn of 1943, the German administration of occupied Poland had reduced Warsaw to a city operating under two parallel systems of governance, one visible, one buried. Above ground, the German civil and military apparatus controlled movement, food supply, labor allocation, and a legal framework of life and death. Below it, in basements behind false walls, in sewers and attic rooms, a shadow state had taken root with its own courts, schools, currency, postal network, and army. The two systems were not equally matched, but they had coexisted in a state of violent equilibrium for 4 years. By October 1943, that equilibrium was ending. The man at the center of what followed was not a battlefield commander. He held no divisional rank and commanded no armored formation. His name was Stefan Rowecki, and he had already been captured. His successor, General Tadeusz Bór-Komorowski, had assumed command of the Army of Kutschera, the Home Army, in the summer of 1943 under circumstances that offered no grace period. Rowecki's arrest by the Gestapo in June had been a catastrophic intelligence failure. It demonstrated, with brutal clarity, that the German security apparatus had penetrated levels of the underground that its commanders had believed secure. What Bór-Komorowski inherited was an organization of approximately 300,000 registered members, spread across a country that no longer existed as a legal entity under international law. Poland had been partitioned, occupied, renamed, and administered as a colonial territory. The Home Army's mandate, issued by the Polish government in exile in London, was to survive, to maintain resistance, and to prepare for a single decisive uprising at the moment of German military collapse. A moment that would need to be identified, timed, and executed with precision that no underground army in history had yet achieved. That moment had not arrived in October 1943, but the pressure to act was building from directions the command could not fully control. The German security operation, codenamed Außerordentliche Befriedungsaktion, the extraordinary pacification operation, had been running in various forms since 1940. By 1943, it had escalated into a systematic campaign of mass arrest, execution, and deportation specifically targeting the intelligentsia, administrative class, and suspected resistance infrastructure. The Polayak prison in Warsaw was processing hundreds of prisoners each month. Street executions, public shootings of civilians in response to underground actions, had become a regular instrument of German administrative policy. Each execution created a political and operational problem for the Home Army Command. The underground press documented the killings. The London government received reports and filed protests. The civilian population looked to the Home Army for evidence that resistance was not simply a suicide pact with no return. The pressure to conduct retaliatory actions, to demonstrate that German officers and Gestapo officials were not beyond reach, was not abstract. It was embedded in every communication the command received from subordinate units, from the civilian population, and from London. But retaliation created its own arithmetic. German policy was explicit and documented. For every German killed by underground action, a fixed number of Polish civilians would be executed in reprisal. The ratio varied by time and circumstance, but it had never fallen below 10-1. In practice, it was often far higher. The German command published these ratios in public announcements. They were not secret. They were instruments of governance, designed to make the cost of resistance calculable and therefore prohibitive. Bór-Komorowski's operational dilemma in the autumn of 1943 was therefore not a question of whether to resist. The Home Army's existence was resistance. The question was how to sustain an organization of 300,000 people under conditions of escalating German security pressure without either provoking reprisals that decimated the civilian population or allowing the organization to atrophy into passivity that would destroy its morale and its political legitimacy. The German security campaign had a specific institutional target in this period: the Home Army's officer corps. The Gestapo and SS had identified, through informers and the documents seized with Rowecki, a significant portion of the organizational structure. Arrest operations were accelerating. In September and October 1943, a series of raids had eliminated several regional commanders and disrupted communication networks that had taken years to build. The Home Army's Intelligence Directorate, known as Oddział II, tracked these operations as best it could. What the intelligence assessment showed by October 1943 was a pattern. German security was not simply reacting to underground actions. It was executing a systematic decapitation campaign, targeting the institutional leadership of the armed resistance with a specific goal of destroying the organization's capacity to function as a coherent military force before the Eastern Front situation forced a German withdrawal. This assessment produced a command-level debate that was conducted not in a conference room, but through a series of written communications passed through the underground's courier network. The debate was between two operational philosophies. The first held that the Home Army should preserve its forces and infrastructure at all costs, accepting German security pressure as a temporary condition that would be resolved by the course of the wider war. The second held that active resistance, including targeted assassinations of senior German security officials, was necessary to disrupt the decapitation campaign and maintain the organization's operational capacity. The resolution of this debate was not a single decision made on a single day. It was a sequence of authorizations, each narrower and more specific than what had been requested, each carrying consequences that the authorizing command could not fully anticipate. In November 1943, the Home Army Command authorized operation heads, Akcja Główki, a campaign of targeted assassination against the most operationally significant German security officials in Warsaw. The authorization was calibrated. It was not a general license for offensive action. It identified specific individuals whose removal would disrupt the Gestapo's capacity to continue the decapitation campaign against the Home Army's officer corps. The targets were German, not Polish collaborators. The reasoning was that eliminating German security officials would create institutional disruption. The need to replace experienced operators, retrain informant networks, rebuild operational knowledge. That would buy the Home Army time. The targeting process was itself a significant intelligence and ethical operation. The Home Army's Intelligence Directorate was required to establish, for each proposed target, that the individual was operationally significant to the security campaign, that no viable alternative existed to eliminate the threat they posed, and that the likely reprisal casualties were proportionate to the operational benefit. This proportionality calculation was not theoretical. Every member of the command knew the reprisal ratio. Every authorization implicitly accepted a number of civilian deaths as a consequence. Franz Kutschera was identified in this period as the single most significant target in Warsaw. He had arrived in September 1943 as SS and police leader for the Warsaw district, SSBF Warsaw, with a specific mandate to intensify the security campaign. His operational record in other theaters was documented by Home Army intelligence. He had overseen large-scale pacification operations in Belarusia before his Warsaw assignment. Within weeks of his arrival, the frequency and scale of street executions in Warsaw increased markedly. Public shootings that had previously occurred in dozens were now occurring in hundreds. Kutschera's administration was treating the Warsaw population as a security problem to be managed through escalating violence. The intelligence assessment submitted to Bór-Komorowski's command in late 1943 argued that Kutschera was not simply one official among many. He was the operational architect of the current campaign. His removal would not end German security operations, but it would impose a period of institutional disruption. The time required to appoint a replacement, brief that replacement, and restore the tempo of operations. That could allow the Home Army to recover some of what it had lost in the previous months. The authorization that followed was specific, documented, and acknowledged the reprisal consequences. The Home Army Command understood that executing an SS general in the streets of Warsaw would produce a German reprisal of unprecedented scale. The calculation that authorized the operation accepted this consequence on the grounds that continued inaction would produce an equivalent or greater loss. Not through mass reprisals, but through the systematic elimination of the underground's institutional capacity. This is not the logic of heroism. It is the logic of attrition conducted by an organization that had no good options. The operation was assigned to Ketty, the Home Army Sabotage and Direct Action Directorate. The unit selected to carry it out was a detachment of soldiers who had spent months operating under the particular conditions of Warsaw. People who knew the city, who could move through it, who had survived long enough to develop the operational discipline that underground warfare required. The planning consumed weeks. Kutschera moved through the city with a vehicle convoy and armed escort. His route from his residence to SS headquarters on Suka Avenue followed a predictable pattern. The ambush would need to stop the convoy, eliminate the target, and allow the operatives to withdraw through a city under German control. A city where every major intersection was monitored, where random document checks were routine, and where a gunshot on a main thoroughfare would bring armed response within minutes. The operation took place on February 1st, 1944. Kutschera's convoy was intercepted on Suka Avenue in the early morning. The engagement lasted less than 2 minutes. Kutschera was killed. Several members of his escort were killed or wounded. Of the Home Army operatives involved were killed 2 in the immediate action, 2 who were wounded and captured and subsequently died. Others were wounded but reached safety. The German response was immediate and calibrated to its own doctrine. Within hours, the German administration announced reprisal executions. Over the following days, approximately 300 Polish prisoners held in the Pojak and other detention facilities were executed in public locations throughout Warsaw. Suka Avenue, Spitalna Street, other sites chosen for their visibility. The German administration's announcement explicitly linked the executions to Kutschera's killing. The arithmetic was being demonstrated in real time. The Home Army Command's assessment of the operation's consequences was conducted under conditions that allowed no detachment. The men and women who authorized the operation knew the reprisal count. They had known it would come. The question the command was required to answer, and could not answer with certainty at the time, was whether the operational disruption imposed on the German security apparatus justified those deaths. The evidence available after the fact suggests a partial answer. Kutschera's successor was not appointed immediately. The tempo of the German security campaign did slow in the weeks following the operation. Not because the Germans abandoned their objectives, but because the institutional disruption was real. The replacement required briefing. The informant networks required assessment. The operational rhythm was interrupted. Whether this interruption was large enough, whether it saved more lives than the reprisals cost, is a question that the historical record cannot resolve with precision because the counterfactual. What would have happened to the Home Army Officer Corps if Kutschera had continued his operations through the spring of 1944 is not accessible. What is accessible is the documented record of what followed. The Home Army continued to operate. The organization that survived in 1944 was damaged but functional. In August 1944, it launched the Warsaw Uprising, a 63-day battle that destroyed the city and approximately 200,000 of its inhabitants, military and civilian, through fighting, German reprisals, and deliberate destruction. The uprising's failure was produced by the convergence of factors far larger than any single decision made in 1943. Soviet operational decisions on the Eastern Front, Allied logistics constraints, German defensive capacity, and the fundamental asymmetry between an underground army and a professional military force supported by artillery and armor. The decisions made in October and November 1943, the authorizations issued by Bór-Komorowski's command, the targeting of Kutschera, the acceptance of reprisal costs. These were decisions made by people who did not know what August 1944 would bring. They knew what October 1943 required. They knew the organization was losing officers faster than it could replace them. They knew that inaction had its own cost, measured in the same currency as action. They made the calculations available to them with the information available to them and authorized an operation that killed a senior German security official, cost the lives of 4 of their own soldiers, and produced the execution of approximately 300 prisoners who would, in all probability, have been executed anyway. The Powiat's prisoner population turned over constantly under the German administration, and very few of those who entered it left through the front gate. This is the nature of decisions made under occupation. The alternatives are not between action with cost and inaction without cost. They are between different configurations of cost, none of which can be fully calculated in advance, all of which must be accepted in real time by people who understand that they are accepting them. The Home Army's command made those decisions within a framework of institutional accountability. To the London government, to their own subordinates, to the civilian population they were embedded in, they documented their reasoning. They calibrated their authorizations. They accepted the consequences as consequences, not as abstractions. History has not resolved whether they were right. It has recorded what they did and what followed. The organization they commanded is now documented, studied, and assessed by scholars who have access to archives that were hidden or destroyed during the events themselves. What those scholars have found is an institution operating under conditions of extreme constraint, making decisions that foreclosed other options and living with the results. The Post continues on Succa Avenue today. The building at number 25 is a museum. The records it contains are detailed, specific, and irreducibly difficult. These events are documented in Polish military and civilian records, German occupation administrative archives, and post-war testimonies collected by the Polish Underground State Research Foundation and the Polish National Remembrance Institute. This account contains no dialogue or fabricated details. Where historical records are unclear, this is noted. The decision-making process described reflects institutional records reconstructed by historians such as Marek Nakerwacz, Stefan Korbonsky, and Jan Nowak-Jezeransky. These accounts are documented, not dramatized. They exist to examine how decisions were made and what the cost was. If this account prompts you to delve deeper into historical records, resources are available. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, comment, and like for documented accounts of decisions made under circumstances where no clean alternatives were available.